Hello, my name is Katherine Jackson, and for our Reentry program presentation, I've selected a wonderful organization based out of Roanoke, Virginia, called Virginia Cares. They are the Commonwealth's statewide reentry solution. Virginia Cares, CARES standing for Community Action Reentry System, has an amazing story and a long, rich history. Their mission statement is to lead a statewide network of reentry programs that reduces recidivism, promotes public safety by advocating for returning citizens, provides supportive services to help them live successful lives. In this presentation, we're going to examine three important components of the Virginia Cares organization. The first component, we're going to travel back through the pages of their history and look to their roots and birth. And the second component, we're going to examine the years of growing pains and program growth. And the final third component brings us to the Virginia Cares programming of today. The roots of Virginia Cares essentially begins in 1965 with the Vocational Rehabilitation Program. This was a joint program with the Roanoke Total Action Against Poverty, also known as TAP, and the local Department of Social Services. This work would launch a series of initiatives and programs during the 1970s that included life planning workshops with inmates at Roanoke City jails through the years 1976 to 1979, stopgap jobs, temporary employment program, and in 1978, a pre-release program. Remarkably, they had a prison family program that provided transportation to families of prisoners throughout prisons in the state of Virginia. Moving forward, TAP develops the Virginia Cares program, giving birth to Virginia Cares in 1981. Throughout the lifespan of any successful nonprofit organization, they are guaranteed to face intense birthing pains and growing pains throughout the years. Virginia Cares is no exception to this. And with that said, I'd like to transition now into a time period in their history between 1981 and 1982 that I perceive of their intense growing pains and program growth. Some of this growth began with a cooperative agreement with the Department of Corrections and working relationships with parole officers and staff of correctional institutions. This was vital to Virginia Cares to be able to get into the system to implement their programs in the way that they desired. Another huge accomplishment for them was that the Commonwealth adopted Virginia Cares pre-release curriculum, mandating it for every inmate before parole. At the close of 1981, their growth continued, with the Virginia Cares operating pre-release programs in 17 prisons with 422 inmates and a total of 1,019 newly released inmates. Services that they were able to provide to those newly released inmates included housing, family, and substance abuse counseling, employment, clothing, food, and other services. So as they were in their launch, kicking off some important, impactful programs to the inmate community, slashes in federal funds under the Reagan administration forced Virginia Cares into an 85% program cut. This was a huge setback for them. However, the Ford Foundation, Roanoke State Delegation, and 1982 session of the Virginia Legislature assisted with funding efforts to keep Virginia Cares alive. And this is what I found so admirable about Virginia Cares as I was doing the research, that in the absence of 85% less of the funding that they previously had, they did not quit. They continued to do the work and hit the ground hard. And perhaps this is the key to why they are so successful and run so well today. We're going to move forward now into our third component of the presentation, which is the Virginia Cares programming of today. The organizational structure at Virginia Cares is reflected here on this chart. It begins with the board of directors, the executive director, Chief Operations Officer, an Executive Assistant Training Coordinator, Chief Financial Officer, along with a Human Resources Coordinator Finance Assistant. Underneath the Chief Operations Officer are the subcontractors, which is 6 independent subcontracted sites funded by Virginia Cares to run 8 programs and offer services. Each site is staffed with a case manager, an employment specialist, and an intake specialist. However, the WINGS program in Roanoke is also staffed with a mental health navigator. Presented here are Virginia Cares affiliates and members of the Virginia Community Action Partnership. I'd like to move on now to share some of the programming and client services offered through Virginia Cares and its subcontracted sites. This begins with an evidence-based approach using the risk needs responsivity model, also known as the R&R. The R&R model ensures that ex-offenders at all risk levels are provided with appropriate services. Some of these programs and services include the WINGS Women's Reentry Program, Risk and Needs Assessment, and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. This involves the use of the Carey Guide's Cognitive Behavioral Change curriculum, which is used across probation and parole offices and reentry programs to discourage criminogenic thinking and behaviors with the goal of reducing the likelihood of recidivism. Also offered is case management, job readiness and employment assistance, motivational interviewing, peer support groups, and emergency aid, which involves food, clothing, transportation assistance, funding for identification and critical documents. Educational workshops are offered as well that are relevant to reentry. I think it's also important to mention right now the statewide advocacy that Virginia Cares is involved in. This includes restoration of rights, which assists participants with having their voting rights restored, along with an organizational advocacy for voting rights reformation in the state of Virginia. They are also involved in the International Ban the Box campaign, which encourages employers to remove the check-a-box indicating their criminal history on their initial job application. Employers are encouraged to inquire about their criminal history later on in the application process to ensure a more equitable hiring practice for ex-offenders. And notably, Virginia Cares is an accepted part of Virginia's criminal justice system today. Through Virginia Cares and subcontractors, program reach in Virginia is statewide. And as you can see, it's quite impressive on the map displayed here, just how far and wide their programs are touching lives in the cities, towns, and counties that they currently serve. Pivoting now, we're going to examine Virginia Care's current rate of recidivism and how they compare with Virginia State's rate of recidivism. As you can see in the chart provided for fiscal year 2018 to 2019, Virginia Cares had a total number of 1,619 program participants. 96 out of that total number had recidivated, which gives Virginia Cares a current rate of recidivism at 6%. According to the Virginia Department of Corrections, in 2020, the recidivism rate in Virginia was at 23.1% and continues to have the second lowest recidivism rate in the nation. Virginia Cares is meticulous in the manner in which they measure their programming. And in the next slide, we're going to take a look at a sample snapshot of how they measure programming efforts at each subcontracted site. Shown here is a good example and a sample of how Virginia Cares measures programming throughout the year. Now, as you can see listed are certain outcomes that are expected of each subcontracted site. Services and programs are listed underneath outcomes, and each quarter data is compiled to find out by the end of the year if each site has fulfilled its contracted outcomes. There is also a scoring system in place to ensure that each site is in compliance. Program measurement is important, but equally important is an organization's ability to convey the program impact and outcomes throughout their fiscal year. I feel that Virginia Cares does an excellent job of providing this information with the use of this infographic that I found in their 2018 and 2019 annual report. I'd also like to mention that since 1981, VA Cares has served nearly 105,000 felons, and during their fiscal year of 2018 to 2019, 550 individuals were served prior to their release, and 1,027 returning citizens were served within 12 months of release from incarceration. Program funding at Virginia Cares is comprised of federal and state government grants and donations and other contributions. For the fiscal year of 2019, the majority of their funding was brought in through the use of government grants. I would also like to share with you, for their fiscal year 2019, their financials. Displayed here on the chart is their revenue, liabilities, assets, and expenses. As I close out this presentation, I would like to leave with you this success story of Shannon B. Shannon came to Peoples Inc.'s VA Cares office seeking a fresh start. Prior to her legal problems, Shannon was a detention officer at a regional jail system who balanced a full-time career alongside part-time employment with the U.S. Marshal Service and 13 rental properties. A mother of 2 and a wife, her life was turned upside down when her husband was injured in a motorcycle accident, leaving him bedridden and dependent on pain medication. In the midst of balancing work and life stress, Shannon found herself to be increasingly slipping into unhealthy behaviors. She eventually resigned from her job at the jail and found her life spinning out of control as she began to abuse her husband's pain medications. Her destructive behaviors led to separation from her husband and eventually incarceration. After being released from jail, Shannon found herself highly motivated to improve her situation. She called VA Cares to meet with staff, attend meetings, and she immediately felt at home in the program among the friendly faces of staff, saying, "I never felt judged." Through VA Cares, she was able to obtain her driver's license again and was put in contact with other People Inc. programs to help her achieve goals. She has found permanent housing and is working on getting her finances back on track. Shannon is deeply thankful for VA Care Services, saying, "Most of all, for reminding me that there are still people in this work who care and are willing to help." I would like to take time to give a special thanks and shout out to Anthony West, Virginia Cares Chief Operations Officer. Without his support and assistance, this presentation would not have been possible. I'd also like to add that if you're interested in furthering the important work that Virginia Cares is doing today, you can make a donation right on their website at vacares.org. Contribute now.